Captain David Reeves had seen enough combat to recognize the moment when luck abandoned you completely, leaving nothing but training, desperation, and the slim hope that enemy forces might be having an equally terrible day. His reconnaissance squad lay scattered across 3 kilometers of crystalline forest, victims of an ambush that had turned their routine patrol into a masterclass in how quickly military operations could transform from textbook execution to catastrophic failure requiring immediate evacuation. The plasma burns across his combat armor told stories of energy weapons that packed considerably more punch than intelligence reports had suggested, while his empty ammunition counters painted a tactical picture that professional soldiers preferred not to contemplate too closely. Seraphim VII's alien landscape offered little comfort. Trees that sang in harmonics that made human nervous systems itch, ground that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and an atmosphere that tasted of ozone and something his translation software couldn't identify but labeled as metaphysical significance. Outstanding, David muttered, checking his suit's medical readouts and discovering that adrenaline was doing most of the work of keeping him functional. Lost contact with base, ammunition exhausted, and wandering through a forest that appears to have been designed by beings whose aesthetic sensibilities include mildly hallucinogenic as a fundamental landscape feature. This is definitely going in the official report under learning experiences that nearly resulted in casualties. The sound that made him freeze came from somewhere above and behind, a resonance that combined musical tones with the distinctive hum of advanced energy systems charging for deployment. David's combat experience identified it immediately as the approach signature of an angel-class ethereal, the beings whose combination of devastating beauty and lethal capability had earned them a reputation that made hardened Marines request transfers to safer assignments like explosive ordnance disposal or hostile xenobiology research. He turned slowly, hands raised in what he hoped would be interpreted as surrender rather than preparation for last-stand heroics, and found himself face to face with something that challenged his understanding of how evolution was supposed to work. The angel-class warrior stood nearly 7 feet tall, her luminescent skin seeming to generate its own light while flowing silver hair moved in patterns that defied local atmospheric conditions. Those distinctive elongated ears marked her as unmistakably ethereal, but everything else about her presence suggested beings whose development had taken paths that transcended conventional biology. "Well," David said, proud that his voice remained steady despite circumstances that would have justified considerably less professional composure, "I don't suppose you're interested in discussing prisoner exchange protocols or the possibility of temporary ceasefire agreements while I figure out how to contact my commanding officers." The angel's golden eyes fixed on him with the kind of focused attention usually reserved for complex mathematical problems or specimens requiring detailed scientific analysis. Her bioluminescent armor shifted through color patterns that seemed to respond to her emotional state, while the crystal blade in her hand hummed with energy frequencies that made David's teeth ache in sympathetic resonance. She moved with fluid grace that made every step seem choreographed, circling him with the patient precision of someone conducting thorough threat assessment. David had faced enough combat situations to recognize predatory behavior, but her movements suggested evaluation criteria that extended beyond simple military considerations into territory his training hadn't prepared him to navigate. "You are Captain David Reeves, 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion, Human Colonial Forces," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to bypass his hearing and resonate directly in his consciousness. "Your unit's mission parameters included surveillance of ethereal supply routes and assessment of defensive capabilities in this sector." "That's classified information," David replied automatically, then realized the absurdity of maintaining operational security while standing weaponless before someone whose species possessed technology that could probably extract his complete military history through methods he didn't want to think about too carefully. "Though I suppose standard protocols for information protection become somewhat academic when facing beings whose intelligence-gathering capabilities apparently include reading minds." The angel's expression shifted into what might have been amusement, her luminescent features taking on warmth that seemed entirely incongruous with her reputation for swift and merciless disposal of human military personnel. "Your thoughts are difficult to access, Captain Reeves. Your species' neural patterns create interference that complicates direct consciousness interface. I'll file that under unexpected advantages of human neurological evolution, David said, noting how the crystalline forest around them seemed to respond to her presence with shifting patterns of light that created an atmosphere resembling a living cathedral. Though I'm curious about why we're having this conversation instead of you demonstrating the legendary efficiency of ethereal combat techniques. The crystal blade in her hand pulsed brighter, energy patterns flowing along its edge like captured lightning, while her golden eyes held depths that suggested eons of experience with decisions that determined the fate of entire civilizations. David found himself thinking that whatever happened next would probably involve consequences that extended far beyond his personal survival or the tactical objectives of his reconnaissance mission. Because, Captain Reeves, she said, her voice carrying weight that made the very air around them seem to pause in anticipation, your presence here represents something that transcends the simple mechanics of warfare between our species. You have arrived at a convergence point where individual choices can alter patterns that span millennia. David felt his understanding of reality perform gymnastics while his tactical training struggled to accommodate concepts that violated everything he thought he knew about military operations and the reasonable limits of cosmic significance that should attach to routine reconnaissance missions. The angel, who had introduced herself as Saraleth through a series of harmonics that David's translation software rendered as "she who judges the worthy," continued her evaluation with the methodical precision of someone whose decisions carried consequences that extended across star systems. Her movements created ripples in the crystalline forest's bioluminescent patterns, as if the planet itself was responding to her emotional state and the weight of whatever choice she was contemplating. Your military records indicate 17 successful reconnaissance missions, 3 decorations for valor under fire, and a psychological profile that classifies you as adaptable under extreme stress, Saraleth said, apparently accessing databases that should have been secured behind multiple layers of encryption and hostile xenobiology countermeasures. But records cannot capture the essential qualities that determine whether an individual possesses the strength to bear knowledge that transcends their species' current understanding. David watched her crystal blade shift through spectrum of colors that seemed to represent some kind of scanning process, while trying not to think too hard about the implications of beings whose technology could apparently read military files from across interstellar distances. When you say, bear knowledge, you're speaking metaphorically, right? Because my training in classified information handling specifically excludes protocols for managing cosmic significance or existential responsibility beyond normal military parameters. Saraleth's elongated ears shifted forward with what David was beginning to interpret as either concentration or amusement. Cross-species emotional interpretation hadn't been covered extensively during officer training, but survival instincts were providing rapid education in ethereal behavioral patterns. The patterns flowing across her luminescent skin suggested deep consideration of factors that extended beyond his immediate survival prospects. The war between your species and mine, she explained, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed designed to convey concepts that transcended normal linguistic limitations, represents surface manifestations of conflicts that involve forces your science cannot yet detect or comprehend. What you classify as territorial disputes over colonial expansion actually reflects the approach of cosmic cycles that will reshape the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. Cosmic cycles, David repeated, his tactical mind struggling to accommodate strategic implications that apparently operated on timescales that made military planning seem like short-term contingency management. Are we talking about astronomical events, dimensional physics, or the kind of metaphysical concepts that usually require advanced degrees in theoretical philosophy to discuss intelligently? The crystalline forest around them began shifting into new configurations, with bioluminescent trees rearranging themselves in patterns that seemed to respond to Saraleth's presence like living architecture adjusting to accommodate honored guests. David noticed that his combat suit's environmental sensors were registering energy readings that defied conventional understanding of how matter and space were supposed to interact. Your species stands at a threshold, Saraleth continued, her golden eyes reflecting depths that suggested experience spanning eons of observing lesser civilizations struggle with concepts that challenged their fundamental assumptions about reality. The conflicts you have witnessed represent preparation for transformations that will either elevate humanity to new levels of consciousness or destroy you through exposure to forces beyond your current capacity to comprehend. And let me guess, David said, noting how his weapons systems remained offline while environmental readings suggested the atmosphere around them was becoming increasingly conducive to life forms that operated on principles his biology textbooks hadn't covered. My stumbling into this particular location at this specific moment represents some kind of cosmic coincidence that transforms routine military reconnaissance into mystical significance management. Saraletha's response involved movements that seemed to combine combat assessment with what might have been ritual significance, her crystal blade tracing patterns in the air that left brief trails of energy hanging in space like luminous calligraphy. Your presence here represents a convergence point, a moment where individual choice can alter outcomes that will echo across generations of both our species. The implications of her words settled into David's consciousness like weights dropping into still water, while his military training warred with growing understanding that his survival might depend less on tactical expertise than on his willingness to accept responsibility for consequences that extended far beyond personal or even species-level survival. So when you say I've arrived at a convergence point, he said carefully, you're suggesting that whatever happens between us in the next few minutes will somehow influence the fate of entire civilizations through mechanisms that operate beyond conventional cause and effect relationships. Essentially, yes, Saraleth replied, her voice carrying the kind of certainty that suggested access to information sources that transcended normal sensory input or logical deduction. But the choice of how those consequences unfold rests with you, Captain Reeves. Your species' survival may depend on decisions you make while possessing incomplete understanding of their ultimate significance. David found himself contemplating the surreal reality that his routine reconnaissance mission had somehow evolved into cosmic responsibility management, while standing weaponless before a being whose beauty masked intelligence and power that challenged every assumption he'd made about humanity's place in the universe. Well, he said finally, I suppose there are worse ways to discover that your military career has unexpectedly expanded into metaphysical territory than having the conversation with someone who looks like mythology given physical form. Though I have to say, officer training definitely didn't include protocols for managing interstellar significance while conducting impromptu philosophical discussions with hostile alien forces. Saraletha's crystal blade moved with liquid precision, coming to rest inches from David's throat while energy patterns flowed along its edge like captured starlight given purpose and direction. The weapon hummed with frequencies that seemed to resonate in his bones, while her golden eyes held depths that suggested she was evaluating factors that extended far beyond his immediate threat potential or military value. The choice I offer you, Captain Reeves, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the crystalline forest around them shift into more complex patterns, violates every protocol established by my people for interaction with your species. By the laws of the ethereal dominion, humans encountered in contested territory are to be eliminated swiftly to prevent intelligence gathering and tactical analysis. David remained perfectly still, acutely aware that even slight movements might be interpreted as hostile actions by someone whose reflexes operated at speeds that would make his combat training seem like slow-motion choreography. But you're considering alternatives to standard elimination procedures because my accidental presence here represents some kind of cosmic significance that transcends normal military protocols. Your species approaches a transformation that will either destroy you or elevate you beyond current limitations, Saraleth explained, her blade maintaining its position while her luminescent skin shifted through patterns that seemed to indicate deep internal conflict. The knowledge required to navigate this transformation cannot be transmitted through normal communication channels, it must be carried by individuals whose character has been tested under circumstances that reveal their essential nature. The crystalline forest responded to her emotional state with cascading changes in bioluminescent displays, creating an atmosphere that resembled a living cathedral where decisions of cosmic importance were being weighed by beings whose understanding transcended conventional mortality. David felt the weight of her evaluation like a physical presence, as if his thoughts and intentions were being examined by intelligence that operated on principles his human consciousness could barely comprehend. When you say, carried, David said carefully, noting how his combat suit's sensors were registering energy readings that violated several fundamental laws of physics, you're talking about more than just delivering messages or transmitting data files. You're describing some kind of direct knowledge transfer that would fundamentally alter my understanding of reality. Saraletha's elongated ears shifted into configurations that suggested approval mixed with concern, while her crystal blade pulsed with internal light that seemed to synchronize with her heartbeat. The artifact I can give you contains compressed understanding of cosmic cycles that govern the development of consciousness across multiple dimensions. But accepting this knowledge comes with responsibility that extends beyond personal survival or species loyalty. Responsibility for what, exactly? David asked, though he suspected the answer would involve concepts that his military training hadn't prepared him to evaluate properly. Because I'm getting the impression that we're moving beyond routine military obligations into territory that might require advanced degrees in metaphysical crisis management. The Angel's response involved complex movements that seemed to combine combat readiness with what might have been ceremonial significance, her presence creating ripples in local spacetime that made David's environmental sensors throw error messages every few seconds. You would become guardian of knowledge that could save both our species, or destroy them through premature exposure to forces beyond their current capacity to control. David watched as the crystalline forest around him continued shifting into new configurations, apparently responding to Saraleth's emotional state as she wrestled with decisions that would echo across star systems and generations. The bioluminescent patterns flowing through the landscape created an atmosphere that suggested the planet itself understood the significance of whatever choice was being made. So let me understand this correctly, he said, maintaining the tone of professional calm that had served him through previous impossible situations. You're offering to spare my life and provide me with cosmic knowledge that could determine the survival of both human and ethereal civilizations, but accepting this offer would transform me from a simple reconnaissance officer into someone responsible for managing information that could either save or destroy everything I care about. The choice must be yours, Captain Reeves, Saraleth said, her voice carrying weight that seemed to make the very air around them pause in anticipation. I cannot compel you to accept this responsibility, nor can I guarantee that your species will be capable of using the knowledge wisely. But the convergence patterns suggest that this moment represents the last opportunity for guided transition rather than catastrophic transformation. The crystal blade's energy patterns intensified as Saraleth prepared to make her decision, while David realized that his response to her offer would determine not only his own fate but potentially the trajectory of interstellar civilization for generations to come. The weight of cosmic responsibility pressed against his consciousness like a physical presence, while his tactical training struggled to accommodate concepts that transcended every assumption he'd made about the reasonable limits of individual significance. Well, he said finally, I suppose there are worse ways to discover that your military career has unexpectedly expanded into cosmic guardianship than having the offer made by someone who combines divine beauty with the power to reshape reality. Though I have to say, the briefing materials for this mission definitely understated the potential for metaphysical complications. Saraleth's expression shifted into what might have been relief mixed with apprehension, while her crystal blade began moving away from his throat in movements that suggested a decision had been reached, one that would transform both their destinies in ways that neither species was prepared to understand. The moment Saraleth lowered her crystal blade, David felt reality shift around them like tectonic plates adjusting to new configurations of cosmic significance. Her decision to spare him created ripples in the crystalline forest's energy patterns, with bioluminescent displays cascading through the landscape as if the planet itself was registering the magnitude of what had just occurred. Live, Captain David Reeves, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions beyond normal human perception. But only if you carry what I give you. From within her bioluminescent armor, Saraleth withdrew something that challenged David's understanding of matter, energy, and the boundaries between technology and consciousness. The artifact resembled crystallized starlight shaped into geometric patterns that hurt to observe directly, pulsing with internal energy that seemed to respond to his proximity with increasing intensity. This is a consciousness matrix, Saraleth explained, extending the impossible object toward him with movements that suggested both reverence and reluctance. It contains compressed knowledge of cosmic cycles that will soon transform both our civilizations, along with the terrible burden of choosing which timeline becomes reality. David stared at the artifact, noting how its energy pattern seemed to sync with his heartbeat while filling his peripheral vision with flashes of possible futures that branched and merged like rivers flowing toward unknown destinations. When you say, choosing which timeline becomes reality, you're talking about decision-making responsibilities that extend considerably beyond normal military parameters. The knowledge within this matrix will show you the approaching convergence. The moment when organic consciousness across the galaxy faces transformation that will either elevate all sentient life to new levels of existence or destroy it through forces beyond current comprehension, Saraleth continued, her golden eyes reflecting depths that spoke of eons spent observing lesser beings struggle with concepts that challenged their fundamental assumptions about reality. The artifact's weight seemed to increase as David contemplated accepting it, not through physical mass but through the growing understanding that touching the crystalline matrix would fundamentally alter his relationship with knowledge, responsibility, and the very nature of existence itself. His combat training identified this as the moment when soldiers either stepped forward into unknown territory or retreated to the safety of familiar limitations. And my species' survival depends on my ability to use this knowledge wisely, he said, reaching toward the matrix while feeling its energy patterns begin interfacing with his nervous system before physical contact was even established. Along with accepting that some choices cannot be unmade once their consequences begin rippling across space and time. The matrix will integrate with your consciousness gradually, Saraleth warned, her voice carrying both blessing and warning as David's fingers approached the artifact's crystalline surface. You will see the patterns that govern cosmic development, understand the forces that threaten all organic life, and bear the responsibility of guiding your species through transformations that will determine whether consciousness survives the approaching convergence. David's hand closed around the artifact, and reality exploded into understanding that flooded his mind with visions of galactic cycles, dimensional interfaces, and the terrible beauty of cosmic forces that shape the development of intelligence across vast scales of space and time. He saw the war between humans and ethereals as merely the surface manifestation of deeper conflicts involving entities whose existence transcended conventional understanding of life, death, and the boundaries between matter and consciousness. The knowledge burned through his neural pathways like fire given sentience, showing him futures where humanity evolved beyond current limitations and timelines where his species faced extinction through exposure to forces they couldn't comprehend. Every possible outcome depended on choices he would make using wisdom. The matrix was downloading directly into his consciousness, transforming him from simple soldier into guardian of cosmic knowledge. The responsibility is yours now, David Reeves, Saraleth said, her form beginning to shimmer as if she was fading into another dimension. Use the knowledge well, for both our species depend on your wisdom in the trials that approach. David felt the artifact's integration with his consciousness complete itself, leaving him fundamentally changed while still standing in the crystalline forest that had witnessed his transformation from reconnaissance officer to cosmic messenger. The weight of galactic responsibility pressed against his mind like a new organ he was still learning to use, while understanding flooded through his thoughts in patterns that would take years to fully process. Well, he said, addressing the space where Saraleth had stood before vanishing into whatever realm angel-class ethereals inhabited between their interventions in mortal affairs, I suppose there are worse ways to discover that your military career has unexpectedly expanded into cosmic guardianship than receiving divine artifacts from alien beings who combine beauty with the power to reshape reality. The matrix pulsed within his consciousness, showing him the path back to human territory and the challenges that awaited when he attempted to explain that routine reconnaissance had evolved into responsibility for guiding humanity through transformations that would echo across the galaxy. His journey home would be the beginning of a new phase of existence where individual choices carried consequences that spanned star systems and generations. David began walking through the crystalline forest, carrying knowledge that could save or destroy everything he held dear, while the artifact's wisdom whispered in his mind about cosmic cycles, approaching convergence, and the terrible beauty of consciousness evolving towards something beyond current human comprehension. His transformation from soldier to cosmic guardian illustrated how sometimes the most profound responsibilities arrive through simple encounters with beings whose mercy carries the weight of galactic significance. The crystalline forest sang in harmonies that seemed to celebrate his acceptance of cosmic responsibility, while David Morrison carried the future of two civilizations in his consciousness and began the long journey toward whatever destiny awaited someone who had been chosen by an alien angel to bear the knowledge that would determine whether consciousness survived the approaching transformation of reality itself.